For decades, the world has operated under one silent assumption: the skies above Canada were always open for America. Us passenger planes, us cargo giants, and even military routes have relied on Canadian airspace as the fastest gateway to Europe and Asia. It wasn't debated, it wasn't questioned, it was simply treated like a permanent privilege. But today, that privilege has been shaken in a way Washington did not expect. Because this morning, Canada made a move that looks technical on paper, but in reality, it's a geopolitical earthquake. A policy shift that directly targets the most valuable shortcut in global aviation, the polar route. And the message behind this decision is loud and clear. Canada is no longer playing defense. Canada is now using geography as a weapon. What exactly happened? Early today, Transport Canada released an official notice that revised overflight conditions for certain carriers. The language was bureaucratic, calm, and almost boring. But behind that boring language was a brutal consequence. The preferential access that us airlines have long enjoyed over Canadian northern routes is now under review, with new restrictions and higher cost structures being applied under the justification of sovereignty and security policy reassessment. For most people, this sounds like paperwork. But for the airline industry, this is a financial disaster unfolding in real time. Because the fastest routes from major US cities to Asia and Europe cut directly over Canada. Flights from New York to Tokyo, Chicago to Seoul, Dallas to Beijing, and cargo corridors that connect the US supply chain to Asia depend heavily on that northern shortcut. When you remove that shortcut, planes don't just take a different path. They burn more fuel, they spend more time in the air, they need extra crew planning, and in many cases, they require refueling stops that weren't previously necessary. That turns direct flights into logistical nightmares, and it turns airline profitability into a crisis. This is why the markets reacted so quickly. Airline investors understand that fuel and time are everything. Even adding 1 hour to a long-haul route can destroy margins. And when multiple hours are added across hundreds of weekly flights, the cost is no longer in millions. It becomes billions. And that's exactly what analysts began warning about. The US aviation sector could face massive weekly losses if polar access is restricted or priced aggressively. Not because flights stop completely, but because the economics collapse. When a route becomes too expensive, airlines cancel it, reduce it, or pass the cost on to passengers. And the passenger is always the one who pays. So let's make this simple. If airlines pay more, ticket prices go up. If cargo routes become slower and more expensive, shipping prices go up. If shipping prices go up, Amazon deliveries become slower and more costly. And when supply chains get delayed, factories slow down. That affects jobs, consumer prices, and the entire rhythm of the economy. This is why this isn't just a Canada versus Trump headline. This is a direct threat to inflation. This is a direct threat to the cost of living. And it could become a silent tax on the American consumer, created not by Congress, but by geopolitical retaliation. Now the bigger question is, why did Canada do it now? The timing is not random. Over the past months, the Trump administration has intensified tariff threats and trade pressure against Canada. Steel, aluminum, lumber, and even broader economic penalties have been floated. The language coming from Washington has been aggressive, unpredictable, and often emotional. The strategy has been simple: squeeze Canada until it folds. But Mark Carney is not a traditional politician. He's a financial strategist, a technocrat, a man trained in risk, leverage, and pressure. And what Canada did today reflects that mindset. Instead of shouting back on social media, Canada quietly targeted the one advantage it owns that America cannot replace: geography. Because here is the brutal reality. The United States can threaten tariffs, but Canada can control access. Canada sits on the roof of North America. And if you are flying across the Northern Hemisphere, you either cooperate with Canada, or you pay the price. That is why this move is being described by analysts as one of the smartest pressure tactics Canada has ever used. Not because it's dramatic, but because it is extremely difficult to counter. Trump can't sue Canada in an American court. Trump can't force Canada to open airspace without creating an international crisis. And Trump certainly cannot use the military to pressure a sovereign country without escalating into something far more serious. So for once, Washington is facing a problem that cannot be solved with a tweet, a threat, or a press conference. It requires diplomacy. It requires negotiation. And that is exactly what Trump struggles with the most. Inside the airline industry, the panic is understandable. Airlines don't have time to wait for political drama to settle. They operate on schedules planned months in advance. Routes are calculated down to the minute. Fuel is budgeted precisely. Crew shifts are timed legally. If the route becomes longer, everything breaks. Flights start missing their arrival windows. Crew members time out. Aircraft need repositioning. Cargo contracts get delayed. insurance costs rise, and once reliability collapses, international customers begin switching to competitors. And here's the dangerous part. This doesn't just hurt us airlines, it helps foreign airlines. Asian and European carriers may still be able to access Canadian routes through different agreements or better diplomatic positioning. That means they can offer faster and cheaper flights compared to American airlines. That gives them a competitive advantage. That means us airlines could lose market share globally, not because they are weak, but because their government triggered a trade war that spilled into aviation. Now, imagine the political humiliation behind this. America has spent decades presenting itself as the global controller of trade routes. But today, Canada is effectively reminding Washington that the world is not controlled by slogans. The world is controlled by choke points. And Canada owns one of the biggest choke points in the Northern Hemisphere. This is why the White House reaction is reportedly tense. Because Trump's strategy is based on pressure. But pressure only works when the other side has no leverage. Canada has leverage, massive leverage. And this is where things get even bigger than aviation. Because if Canada is willing to use airspace as a weapon, it raises the question, what else can Canada weaponize? Energy exports, oil flows, electricity grids, critical minerals, manufacturing supply lines. The US economy is deeply tied to Canada in ways most Americans don't realize. Car parts cross the border multiple times. Aluminum is imported. Oil refineries depend on Canadian crude. Lumber supports housing construction. A serious breakdown between Washington and Ottawa doesn't just create political tension. It creates real-world economic pain. And Trump is in a trap. If he escalates, he risks crushing his own economy. If he backs down, he looks weak. And Trump's political identity is built on never looking weak. So what happens next? There are three likely scenarios. The first scenario is that Trump publicly attacks Canada, threatens tariffs, and tries to turn it into a media war. That's the most predictable move. But media war doesn't solve aviation logistics. Airlines will still bleed money. The second scenario is escalation. Trump could threaten restrictions on Canadian airlines, slow border cooperation, or retaliate through trade. But that kind of escalation could backfire immediately. Canada could respond with energy pressure or deeper supply chain disruption. And that would trigger inflation in swing states, the exact states Trump needs politically. The third scenario is the most likely, a quiet backdoor negotiation. A deal made privately so Trump can claim victory publicly. Because the business world will not allow this to drag on for long. The airline CEOs, cargo giants, logistics firms, and Wall Street investors will push the White House to stop the bleeding. And that is why this moment is so dangerous. Not because planes will stop flying tomorrow, but because it reveals something deeper. The American strategy of bullying allies is becoming too costly. Canada is not a weak country. Canada is a strategic country. It is stable. It is resource-rich. It controls the North. And it has a leader who understands leverage. Carney didn't need to scream. He didn't need a rally. He didn't need to insult Trump. He used the cold language of policy and the hard reality of geography. That is how real power works. And the consequences will hit ordinary people first. Ticket prices will rise if this continues. Cargo delays will grow. Shipping costs will increase. Consumer prices will creep upward. Supply chains will tighten. And if the conflict expands into energy or minerals, the pain could become far more severe. This is why today's decision is being described as a turning point. It shows the world that the United States is not untouchable. It shows that allies can push back. And it shows that the future of power isn't only about military strength. It's about control of routes, control of resources, and control of stability. The world is watching this closely. Europe is watching. China is watching. Russia is watching. Because if Canada can successfully pressure Washington, it sets an example. It shows that Trump's aggressive approach has limits. And once the world realizes those limits, America's influence begins to weaken. That is the real danger here. Not just the airline losses, not just the fuel costs, but the shift in global perception. The United States has always depended on the belief that it is the center of the system. But what happens when the system starts rerouting around it? That is the question Canada is forcing America to face. And now the big question becomes, will Trump calm down and negotiate? Or will he double down and turn a trade dispute into an economic crisis? Because if he chooses escalation, the fallout won't just be political. It will be personal. It will show up in grocery prices, in job security, and in your travel costs. This is not a small story. This is a warning sign, a signal that the old North American partnership is entering dangerous territory. And if this situation isn't resolved quickly, the shockwaves will travel far beyond Ottawa and Washington. The skies may still be open today, but the relationship is closing fast. And in the end, the people who pay the price won't be politicians. It will be the working class, the traveler, the consumer, the person trying to live a normal life while leaders play high-stakes power games. So the next 48 hours matter. Watch the airline stocks. Watch the shipping companies. Watch the White House tone. Because if Trump reacts emotionally, this could become one of the most expensive self-inflicted wounds America has faced in years. Canada has the high ground literally, and now America has to decide, negotiate or bleed.